Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jill Caldicott. I'm currently Acting Director of the British Council here in India. And I just want to say how delighted we are to be here at the launch of the festival and to be participating this year. I think all of those of us who live in Delhi look forward to this biennial event. So just to tell you a little bit about the British Council, we're the UK's international organisation for education and cultural relations. And we have a major project theme that we're carrying out at the moment, or have been carrying out for a couple of years, and will continue to do so. We call it Reimagine Arts. And what we're doing through that is looking for new ways to connect artists between the UK and India. Of course, we work across the world, and we're looking to make those connections everywhere that we work. We're absolutely delighted to be welcoming David Campany on his very first visit to India. I'm going to tell you a little bit about David now. David writes, he curates exhibitions, he makes art, and he teaches a range of modules in photography theory and practice from undergraduate to doctoral study. He is the author of a number of books, and those include Walker Evans, the magazine work, Gasoline, Jeff Hall, Picture of Women, and Photography and Cinema, Art and Photography. He has also written for a number of magazines, which I'm sure you're very familiar with: Frieze, Photo Works, Aperture, Source, Art Review, the Oxford Art Journal, The Philosophy of Photography, and Tate magazine, among others. He's spoken at a number of art venues worldwide, some of them very well known, including the Pompidou Centre, Jeux de Paume, the Reina Sofia in Madrid, the Tate Modern, New York's Museum of Art and Design, Aperture, and Laval. He's curated a number of major shows, including Mark Neville, Victor Bergin, and Walker Evans, and a show called A Handful of Dust for Laval in Paris. He has been awarded several awards, and he's on the jury for a number of advisory boards as well. I think probably I want to hand over now so that you benefit from not hearing me, but hearing David's talk this morning, his keynote address. But just to finish by saying that he has a PhD. He currently teaches at the University of Westminster in the UK, and was recently awarded the Alice Award, which is a very prestigious annual prize for illustrated books, for his book, The Open Road, Photography and the American Road Trip. So we at the British Council are very happy to support David's participation as the keynote speaker to DPF 2015. Thank you, David. Look forward to hearing your speech.
Thank you, Jill, and also thanks to Iona Ferguson, who masterminded my passage from London to Delhi, which was completed at 3 a.m. this morning. That's when I finally got to the hotel. Usually for public talks, I can practice them, and I can usually speak them without notes, but in the delirium of jet lag, which I have, I don't trust myself to extemporize. I think it would wander off. So I will have to read. I was asked to put some thoughts together around the relation between photography and art. So that's what I've done. Now, I think I should say first of all that festivals of photography really only exist because of the crazy enthusiasms and extraordinary hard work of those who organize them. If you put a festival on, the odds are always stacked against you. It's always an uphill struggle. And all those who attempt to organize a festival are to be congratulated, thanked, and indeed cherished. I've been involved in a number of festivals over the years, and I'm always struck by the kind of grassroots level of enthusiasm without which these things just wouldn't happen. So I I do congratulate you all for putting the festival together. I hear there was quite a lot of work, even last night. Now, you'll have to forgive me for my rather parochial views. Although I'm here in Delhi, I'm not one of those globe-trotting art world types who claim to have a grip on what's going on everywhere. I think there are concerns in photography that are international, but there are also concerns that are very local, and you could see why that is. You know, a camera depicts what's in front of the camera, and what's in front of the camera doesn't go on everywhere, although some things do go on everywhere. Now, I think there are many ways to think about the artistic identity of photography, and that's what I was asked to talk about. There are also many ways to think about the views that image makers who engage with photography in and as art have of what they're doing. And there are many ways to think about how viewers, critics, and curators relate to it all. It's a big, generous, messy field. Or to put it another way, it's a festival. At their best, festivals of photography are where you go to experience the richness and the complexity and the contradictions that always seem to come with the photographic image. And the experience that you have at festivals always seems to be changing. Photography is a moving target, or a swarm, I think, of miniature moving targets. I don't have long, so what I'd like to do here is to think about what's at stake in all of this through two apparently simple ideas, although they may at first seem a little strange: affection and suspicion. Why these two? Why affection and suspicion? Well, because there are good reasons to be affectionate about photography, and we saw an example of that just now. But there are equally good reasons to be suspicious of it. It seems clear to me that as a medium, however you define medium, photography can be fascinating and compelling for image makers and audiences. I'm guessing you wouldn't be here if you didn't think this was so. But as a mass medium, in the hyper-commercialized service of all that is shallow and exploitative and distracting in contemporary visual culture, there's plenty in photography to be suspicious about. Let's call it the corporate military entertainment complex. This complex has the capacity of the ruling order to establish agendas, establish the consensual categories, and the means by which our visual culture is legitimized and governed. To confront photography or to engage with it is to recognize some of those secret powers that it has. Whatever individual and artistic hopes we have for photography, the medium never belongs entirely to the individual or her hopes alone. When we use photography, we use a medium that's defined for most of the world by a very different set of values and assumptions. If we were teaching media studies to a group of 10-year-olds, which I think is something that we should be doing, then we would be teaching them to be critical about the photographic image as it comes to them in the form of news and advertising and corporate social media. Suspicion is an essential tool of survival in this world. At the same time, if we were teaching those same 10-year-olds about photography in an art class, we might well introduce them to what it means to feel some kind of affection for a medium, the craft, the expression, the cultivation of your powers of observation and depiction, the possibilities, and the joy to be taken in it all. But we probably wouldn't want them to ignore the lessons learned in their media studies classes at the same time. More to the point, I think, a particular tension between affection and suspicion has underlined photography's relation to art for a long time now. I thought I'd just pick the most obvious example of this, and it's the one that comes up very often in the histories of photography that are published worldwide. As is often repeated, in the 1910s and the 1920s, the vanguard photographers in Europe and North America broke away from their associations with conservative painting, along with their anxiety about the document character of their medium. Instead, they embraced the look of photography found in the rest of culture, the snapshot, reportage, fashion, the still life, the scientific photograph, the archival image, and so on. This move away from the kind of salon painting version of photography to a kind of more modern and worldly one reconnected photography to the complex and contradictory social life around it as never before. And in doing so, it put art into a new set of relations to the world of the mass media and the illustrated press. So we have here a couple of images from camera work, Alfred Stieglitz's journal based in New York. And you can see quite clearly that move from a kind of imitation of salon painting, picture by the Hofmeisters, to Paul Strand's picture called Blind Woman from 1917. This shift also let in a new wildness and unpredictability into photography. The machinic and automatic character of the image, raw evidence, and all manner of unexpected encounters. It also meant that photography was committed to operating and responding to a world that was and still is changing very fast. This, as I guess is pretty much accepted, was how photography came to be a modern art. Significantly, it coincided with the great shift we associate with a figure like Marcel Duchamp, who with his ready-mades, selecting an object and presenting it as art, and his self-mocking self-portraits, shifted the question from what is beautiful to ask the question, what is art? Art was now going to be the space in which you asked what art was and what it was for. And photography has triumphed in an art culture which is still plagued by or fascinated with these questions, what is beautiful and what is art? And they map quite well, these two questions, onto the ideas of affection and suspicion. What is beautiful? Affection. What is art? Suspicion. To ask what is beautiful might put us on the side of affection, and to ask what is art might put us on the side of suspicion. Photography began to be important to art precisely at the point when we began to wonder what art is in the modern world and what its differences are from all the other fields of photography, be it advertising or fashion or reportage. Let's go back even further. Let's go back to ancient Greece. It's always the ancient Greeks, isn't it? No, it's not the allegory of Plato's cave with the shadows flickering on the wall, which comes up in so many discussions of photography, most famously, I guess, in Susan Sontag's book on photography. Instead, I have in mind a very early encounter between affection and suspicion in art. In his Historia Naturalis, written between AD 77 and 79, Pliny the Elder describes a painting competition. Everyone expects this competition to be won by the much celebrated painter Zeuxis. Now, it's a story that's only a paragraph long. I'll put it on the screen. You don't have to read it. I'll read it. I put it on the screen because if any students want my PowerPoint afterwards, you're welcome to it. You don't have to write down notes or anything. So this is what Pliny the Elder describes. The contemporaries and rivals of Zeuxis, he's the celebrated painter, were Timanthes, Androcydes, Eupompus, and Parrhasius. The last, Parrhasius, entered into a pictorial contest with Zeuxis. Zeuxis represented some grapes, painted so naturally that the birds flew towards the spot where the picture was exhibited. Parrhasius, on the other hand, exhibited a veil, drawn with such singular truthfulness that Zeuxis, elated with the judgment which had been passed upon his work by the birds, haughtily demanded that the veil should be drawn aside to let the picture be seen. Upon finding his mistake, with a great degree of ingenuous candour, Zeuxis admitted that he had been surpassed, for that whereas he himself had only deceived the birds, Parrhasius had deceived him, an artist. Let's presume an artist is better than a bird, but we'll leave that to another day. That's all there is to the story, and I've been reading this since I was an undergraduate in the last millennium. And Pliny tells it in just 4 sentences, but there are so many implications. When I read this passage, this is what I have in my mind's eye. The gathered crowd has looked at the painting of grapes by Zeuxis. Seeing the birds descending around the painter and his canvas, the crowd prepares to give Zeuxis the prize. Then, perhaps on a hill, I'm embroidering the story here, Parrhasius yells, "Not so fast." He makes his way down through the crowd, carrying his canvas. Zeuxis sees that the canvas by Parrhasius is veiled and demands that the veil be pulled back to reveal what is beneath. This is precisely what Parrhasius needs to happen. He requires the atmosphere of charged anticipation, a bit like the opening of a festival. In this setting, he announces he has painted a veil. Now, I suspect that if the paintings by the 2 men were simply presented side by side, Zeuxis would have won a rather boring competition about accuracy. Technically and traditionally, he probably was the better painter. But Parrhasius is thinking not just about the image, but about the particular theatre of spectatorship that surrounds a painting competition and the presentation of art. We might say that Parrhasius creates a specific and novel situation, the intervention. He's that most modern of things, an interventionist. He's a trickster. He's interested in subverting expectations and desires in that moment. It's not about how accurately you can paint. It's about how accurately you can judge expectations. It's a bit like stuntmen in the movies. They don't really look like the actors for whom they are substituting, but in the flow on screen, it doesn't seem to matter. As the stuntman Bob Simmons once said, Bob Simmons, the man who used to stand in for Sean Connery in the James Bond movies, and he looked nothing like him. He used to say, if the action is good, it can be a monkey in a top hat and spats. So let's say Zeuxis had a genuine affection for painting, while Parrhasius is circumspect about it, perhaps even a little suspicious. He's just as interested in the crowd itself and the heated play of expectations. He's interested in the whole institution of art and how it shapes what we experience. Parrhasius is a prototype for our own era in which we cannot help but think simultaneously about the artwork and the institutional structures that allow the artwork to function. Are we not, here in the 21st century, forever caught between Zeuxis and Parrhasius, between the grapes and the veil, between art and the situation of art? Their differences foreshadow the way that the culture of art often feels as if it's forcing us to choose between, say, a figure like Marcel Duchamp, who I see as a kind of Parrhasius figure, playing with expectations, and a kind of master craftsman of the pictorial arts like, say, Picasso or Matisse, or let's be more photographic about it, between, let's say, Henri Cartier-Bresson and Andy Warhol, or between August Sander and his portraits of the German people, and Cindy Sherman pretending to be other people. But art is not so binary. We don't really have to choose between one and the other, especially today. And yet photography still has a very complicated relation to art, and long may that continue. The photographer Hilla Bescher, who sadly died earlier this month, once described... Oh, bit of censorship there. She once described the complicated position of the photographs of industrial architecture she had made for 50 years with her husband Bernd. They travelled all over Europe and North America photographing industrial architecture. And the art world got interested in their pictures in the late 60s and early 70s, at the same time that the world of architecture and architectural historians were interested in these pictures. And she said, "I was always very happy with the borderline existence which our works have had. For a long time, they were just on the edge of art, and there was a very constructive discussion about this borderline, whether photography belonged to art or the sciences." The Bescher's photographs seem to have wandered into art from somewhere else, but that's what made them important to art. Hilla Bescher points us in those remarks towards the idea that no medium is contained by art entirely, least of all photography. This is partly because photography still has so many functions outside of art, but mainly it's because of what I earlier called the document character of the medium, which can never really be erased or superseded. It's always there. This document character conditions photography's various relations to art to this day. In many ways, you don't have to worry about being arty. Just do good photographic work and the art part will take care of itself. In 1970, the Beschers published the first book of their work, which was called Anonymous Skulpturen, Anonymous Sculpture. The title made an explicit connection with the kind of minimalist art that was in vogue at the time, particularly in North America, which used industrial materials and unadorned industrial artifacts like bricks, boxes, fluorescent tubes. Also, their work was aligned with what came to be called conceptual art, a very sort of cold, anti-subjective, slightly bureaucratic kind of practice. Now, reflecting on the relation between documents and artworks in 1928, the German critic Walter Benjamin assembled a very, very intriguing list of 13 propositions, which he put together as binary pairs. And we can look at some of these. It's from a little-known piece that he wrote called 13 Theses Against Snobs. I don't even pretend to understand why it's called that. But what he's trying to think about is, what's the difference between an artwork and a document? An artist makes a work. The primitive expresses himself in documents. The artwork is only incidentally a document. No document is as such a work of art. The artwork is a masterpiece. The document serves to instruct. On artworks, artists learn their craft. Before documents, a public is educated. And so he goes on. I don't need to read them all. The artwork is synthetic, an energy center. The fertility of the document demands analysis. Let's jump to number 13. The artist sets out to conquer meanings. The primitive man barricades himself behind subject matter. Although not entirely consistent, these binaries do express the idea that the artwork and the document may coexist but will remain irreconcilable. Did Benjamin have in mind two separate and distinct categories of objects? Artworks over here, documents over here? Or more radically, was he proposing that art and document might be two potentials of the same object, as in photography, perhaps? He didn't say. Photography has made its strongest claim to art not by choosing between these oppositions, but by dancing across the differences, by insisting on having it both ways, by putting itself forward as both artwork and document, picture and trace. That is to say, putting itself forward as art precisely on the basis that it complicates art as a category, by complicating art as a set of expectations and judgments, coming back to Parhasius. Photography is the exemplary medium for an art culture that no longer knows what it wants from art. Or more radically, photography is the medium for an art culture that knows that art cannot be separated from the rest of life, but still wishes it to be at least a little bit separate. Although photography may well matter as art as never before, to paraphrase the title of a book by Michael Fried, there can be no unified assessment of exactly how it matters. And this lack of unification, I think, is somehow implicit within the medium itself. There is much talk of art now being in a post-medium condition. And in this condition, there are just contemporary artists. In many ways, the decision to identify with this general term, rather than photographer, for example, is a symptom of the attitude that emerged in the 60s and is now commonly accepted. An artist can use any medium they like. They need have no loyalty and no commitment to a medium or a métier. By contrast, the old-fashioned modern artist, or the sort of mediumist artist, let's put it that way, although it elevates the idea of the singular and autonomous artist, does so by elevating the idea of the singular and autonomous medium with which the artist and the audience are expected to identify, for which they are expected to feel some kind of affection. Here the artist is first and foremost a practitioner of their chosen medium. The artist makes the best work they can in their medium, and the art part takes care of itself. I think this is what Man Ray meant when he suggested that photography was not art, but it was an art. In other words, there were no modern artists in the generalized mixed medium sense that we now have contemporary artists. If you were or are a modern artist, you really are a modern painter, or a modern sculptor, or a modern photographer, and so on. It's only when art's mediums begin to be mixed or appropriated or treated as less than separate, or even regarded with suspicion rather than affection, that the general idea of the contemporary artist who makes contemporary art begins to take hold. I guess that's a legitimate position, but it is only half the story. It's also legitimate to have a commitment to a medium in the sense we associate still with old-fashioned modernism. Of course, in this sense, modernism is not a historical term or a category, it's ongoing. As always, there are plenty of practitioners who identify with the medium of photography, and plenty of audiences who respond to that. That's certainly what you see at photography festivals. I would have to presume that everyone in this room likes photography more than the people outside the room. And of course, the suspicions, misunderstandings, and differences between generalized contemporary artists and photographic artists or art photographers is inevitable. Moreover, I think it's misguided to brush aside the differences simply by saying it's all art in the end, because I think that misses the point. Now, we're all familiar with the idea that affection for a medium, any medium, must be some kind of weakness, a symptom of bourgeois capitulation or an anti-revolutionary position or a conservatism or an aesthetic regression or a small-mindedness. Oh, you're only a photographer, that kind of thing. Photographers still suffer this attitude in the art world. That's why certain photographers refuse to take the title photographer and want to be known as artists, even when the only thing they do is photography. And when there's money at stake, who can blame them? Calling yourself an artist can quadruple your prices. To that suspicion of affection for a medium, we could add what has come to be called photography theory. Because so much of the theorization of photography that's now taught in universities has been motivated by a critique of photography as a tool of mass culture, the manipulative world of advertising, fashion, lifestyle imagery, and also a critique of its uses by institutions such as the police, tourism, and mainstream journalism. I guess, if we went back, the tone of this suspicious writing was set very early on by Roland Barthes, firstly in his book Mythologies, which was a collection of essays written in the 50s for a French newspaper, which were critiques of the way mass culture works. Then came a number of essays unmasking the manipulations of popular culture in the 1960s, where he made close readings of the claims and conventions of news photography, advertising, and the cinematic image. Even in Camera Lucida, the book that photographers like, where Barthes did come to accept a degree of affection for photography, he felt the medium's essential qualities had nothing to do with art. In fact, he detested the idea of the art photographer. He felt it just got in the way. It was another filter that needn't be there. What was most important about photography was its relation to traces and to time, the visual trace of that which has been. In fact, he felt artiness could only corrupt the primary characteristics of photography. Alongside Barthes' writings, there was a canon of what we'd have to call iconoclastic writing, or even iconophobic writing that was just suspicious of the image generally, that was established in Europe and North America. I can't speak for this part of the world. I told you I was parochial. And a lot of this was motivated by a suspicion both of art and the mass media. Books like Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle, first written published in 1967, a kind of critique of how the image works in mass culture. But one might also think of Susan Sontag's On Photography, still the best-selling book about photography, and you'd be hard pushed if you read that to think that she even liked photography. In fact, I met her once. Should I digress? I should keep an eye on the time. I met her once. I was working when I was a student at the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London, and she was due to come in to give a talk in the evening. It was a Sunday, a very quiet Sunday. She arrived at 2:00 in the afternoon and said, "I'm here to give a talk." I said, "You're Miss Sontag, aren't you?" I recognized her. She was a very striking woman. And I said, "You're early. In fact, you're 5 hours early. But you can go and, Buckingham Palace is down the road, She said, no, I'll stay here. And like all good intellectuals, she was very curious. And I was studying photography and film at the time, and so she asked me what I was doing. And I skirted around the question of On Photography. I was a serious admirer of all of her writings, apart from On Photography. And the conversation, after about an hour, the conversation grew very quiet. And then she said, "David, you don't like my book, do you?" "What's wrong with it?" I said, "Well, you don't like photography very much." And I said, "More to the point, there are no images in your book." And she said, "Oh, well, that's to do with, copyrights, and we wanted to make the..." I said, "No, it's not." I said, "You just didn't want them in the book." And I think if the pictures were in the book, you'd have written differently. And then she was a very honest woman. She said, no, you're right. She said, I was more interested in photography than photographs. I was more interested in photography as such than the specifics of images. And she said, in fact, I wasn't even able to write about specific images very well. That's a very particular skill and craft. But she said something very nice to me. She said, well, maybe one day you'll write a book called On Photographs, or maybe you'll write a book about a photograph, which I did end up doing. So I actually thank her for her suspicion of the photographic image. All of these kinds of writings, I think, still remain the basis of the theory of photography that's taught in art schools and a few of the photography schools. But the aesthetics of photography are barely considered, and the whole question of what it means to feel commitment to a medium and affection about it is still a source of embarrassment on the part of most advanced writings. It's as if to admit affection for something would automatically mean you'd lost your critical faculties. I just like photography. My view, and I emphasize that it's only my view, is that suspicion without affection leads to cynicism, and affection without suspicion leads to sentimentalism. The challenge is to find a balance in a visual culture that never stays still. Let me move to one of the supposed sources of the suspicion of photography, that there are just too many images in the world. Maybe I should say it like that. It's become a cliche, I think, to speak of there being too many images in the world. I think most of us have caught ourselves saying it or thinking it at one point or another. But who knows what's the correct number of images? If anyone tells you there are too many images, ask them what the correct number is. Of course, it would be absurd to even suggest a number. But I think the complaint misses the point. I think it's in the nature of images, all images, any image, to offer us too much and too little. Images exceed meaning in ways that are unruly and even treacherous. But they are also elusive and enigmatic. René Magritte called it the treason of images. This is why the image world is so bound up by the conventions of genre and the laws of language. Think of how in the mass media, the essential anarchy and ambiguity of the image always has to be explained by text and captions and commentary. But in the last instance, images remain ambiguous and anarchic. This is why they've always been a source of great affection and great suspicion. The anxiety that the world of images might disturb or distort civil society is familiar. How often do we hear that we are bombarded by images or under siege from pictures, as if somehow they were pursuing us, like some great semi-coordinated army? In our narcissism, we might delude ourselves that this is a new problem. This is our problem, affecting only us and only now. In fact, if you go back to the debates of the 20s and 30s, the decades that saw the birth and expansion of what we now call the mass media, you can find many writers complaining that there are too many images. We've had nearly a century of too many images. The arrival of photography in the 1830s and its subsequent development into a mass medium certainly introduced new problems, new pleasures, new affections, and new suspicions into the family of images. But these have only brought out the essentially unpredictable condition of the image as such. Over the last century, photography has become, I think, the exemplary medium for discussions about reproduction, about originality, about authorship, about anonymity, about authenticity, about documents, about quotation, about value, about democracy, and about dissemination, how images move around the world. Photography is the medium that prompted art to rethink what's at stake in all of those concepts, while proving itself to be the medium best placed to articulate and express them. Meanwhile, photography has also been an exemplary pictorial art, the art of depiction. And the pictorial has its basis in the essentially affectionate matter of depiction. I think depiction is a matter of affection. And because it's affectionate, the pictorial remains a regular object of suspicion on the part of the various avant-gardes and the critical theories of photography. Do we need to be caught in that binary the whole time between affection and suspicion? Well, I've noticed that photographers and writers on photography often use the word fascination. Rereading my own words for today, I notice that I've used it a few times already myself. And I make no apologies for that. Certain subjects for photography, or ways of taking photographs, or ways of experiencing photographs, or just thinking about them, may strike us as fascinating. Or maybe we just find the medium fascinating, whichever. The American critic Max Kozloff once wrote a very fine book titled Photography and Fascination. I ought to try and prompt someone into reprinting it. It's never been reprinted. He didn't really explain why he used the word fascination, but in reading his book, which I think is one of the best written on photography, it becomes quite clear how significant fascination is and how particular it is to photography. To be fascinated is to be captivated, compelled, absorbed, beguiled even. And so perhaps fascination itself can prompt us into the contemplation of the whys and the hows of photography. I think fascination is its own form of criticism. Occasionally you come across a photograph and it just fascinates you, and you come to reflect upon why that is. And I think that's an extraordinary force and possibility, and it's very distinct to photography. Fascination is a response that to some extent is beyond aesthetic judgment, beyond any distinction between visual pleasure and visual displeasure, beyond affection and suspicion. To be fascinated is to be seized, to have one's critical faculties suspended, if only temporarily. Other synonyms for fascination include preoccupation, passion, obsession, compulsion, captivation, enchantment. Fascination does not offer the distance required for clear judgment or for contemplation, but it can open up possibilities in those directions. And while fascination is an immersive experience, a consuming experience, it's also decentering and destabilizing when you're fascinated, when you're held in that kind of way by an image. It has all kinds of effects on you that you can never quite account for. And so hence fascination can be subversive in its own ways. Sometimes fascination comes from the sheer strangeness of the photographic appearance of things. For me, and again this is only personal, it's different for all of us, I think of the collages made from film stills by John Steziker, which seem to put image destruction or image suspicion at the surface of a strange and subterranean obsession with the photographic image itself. He just works with old, banal film stills and brings out these kind of strange, repressed forces in them somehow. Stezaker is fascinated by images. He makes that fascination the centre of his practice, in which affection and suspicion are inseparable. Or think of Edward Muybridge and his studies of human and animal locomotion. The pretext of science barely explains the obsessive-compulsive nature of Muybridge's vast project, the hundreds and hundreds of pictures that he took. It's clearly more than trying to decipher whether a horse had all its feet on the ground or not. He just went on and on and on doing it. And it doesn't explain the obsessive-compulsive appeal that his pictures make to us to look and keep looking for whatever it is we wish to find or experience, be it knowledge or some kind of voyeurism. Few bodies of photography have had more influence on the art of the last century than Muybridge's studies. But who cares whether Muybridge's work is art or not? It seems entirely beside the point. Or think of Jeff Wall's picture from 30 years ago called Milk, with its weird white eruption that cannot really explain itself, but is so vividly there. Transformed and yet documented as only a lens and a fast shutter speed can. That exploding milk is a bizarre patch of semi-controlled chaos, a patch of pure fascination amid Wall's arty composition. That photograph by Jeff Wall might fit into an expanded definition of what has come to be called street photography. Why would I suddenly bring up street photography? Well, it's often remarked that street photography is the only genre entirely specific to the medium, while photography borrows and interprets and mashes up all of art's other genres, landscape, still life, the portraiture, the interior, and so forth. It has added this one of its own. There is no street photography in other media. Strictly speaking, what is unique about it is not really the street as such, but the way the camera encourages the possibility of hunting for pictures. A photographer can venture into the unpredictable world and capture impressions quickly with that characteristic mix of crafty planning and quick reactions, design and chance. A hunter can, of course, hunt anywhere. It's just that the modern world that gave rise to photography also gave rise to the bustling modern streets where the hunters' pickings are richest. Street photography might be a practice for purists, but the modern street itself is never pure. Street photography is also the genre in which affection often crowds out suspicion, and so it's the genre that contemporary art has the biggest headache with. As the photographer Paul Graham put it a few years ago, the problem is that whilst you can discuss what Jeff Wall did in an elaborately staged street tableau, like Milk, which I just showed you, which is a staged picture, how do you explain what Gary Winogrand did on a real New York street when he just took the picture, or for that matter, what Stephen Shaw created with his deadpan image of a crossroads in El Paso? Anyone with an ounce of sensitivity knows they did something there, and something utterly remarkable at that. But what? How do we articulate this uniquely photographic creative act and express what it amounts to in terms such that the art world, highly attuned to synthetic creation, the making of something by the artist, can appreciate serious photography that engages with the world as it is? The art world falls in and out of love with photography, and it has done for decades. Like a small child picking up and putting down a toy, as the photographer Louis Baltz once put it. When it's feeling confident, the art world lets photography in. When it's feeling nervous, it keeps it out. But as I said, at the beginning. Photography became important to art just when art was beginning to question its own basis anyway. It's not necessary to expect photography or art's relationship with it to be consistent or unproblematic. The tensions cannot, need not be resolved or dissolved. They are essential. We don't have to choose between affection and suspicion. The medium of photography and the world it responds to demand that we consider both. It's a very productive tension. Thank you.
Illustrated books for his book, The Open Road, Photography and the American Road Trip. So we at the British Council are very happy to support David's participation as the keynote speaker to DPF 2015. Thank you, David. Look forward to hearing your speech.
Thank you, Jill, and also thanks to Iona Ferguson, who masterminded my passage from London to Delhi, which was completed at 3 a.m. this morning. That's when I finally got to the hotel. Usually for public talks, I can practice them, and I can usually speak them without notes, but in the delirium of jet lag, which I have, I don't trust myself to extemporize. I think it would wander off. So I will have to read.
Art venues worldwide, some of them very well known, including the Pompidou Centre, Jeux de Paume, the Reina Sofia in Madrid, the Tate Modern, New York's Museum of Art and Design, Aperture and La Balle. He's curated a number of major shows, including Mark Neville, Victor Bergin and Walker Evans, and a show called A Handful of Dust for La Balle in Paris. He has been awarded several awards, and he's on the jury for a number of advisory boards as well. I think probably I want to hand over now so that you benefit from not hearing me, but hearing David's talk this morning, his keynote address. But just to finish by saying that he has a PhD. He currently teaches at the University of Westminster in the UK, and was recently awarded the Alice Award, which is a very prestigious annual prize for Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jill Caldicott. I'm currently Acting Director of the British Council here in India. And I just want to say how delighted we are to be here at the launch of the festival and to be participating this year. I think all of those of us who live in Delhi look forward to this biennial event. So just to tell you a little bit about the British Council, we're the UK's international organisation for education and cultural relations. And we have a major project theme that we're carrying out at the moment, or have been carrying out for a couple of years, and will continue to do so. We call it Reimagine Arts. And what we're doing through that is looking for new ways to connect artists between the UK and India. Of course, we work across the world, and we're looking to make those connections everywhere that we work. We're absolutely delighted to be welcoming David Campany on his very first visit to India. I'm going to tell you a little bit about David now. David writes, he curates exhibitions, he makes art, and he teaches a range of modules in photography theory and practice from undergraduate to doctoral study. He is the author of a number of books, and those include Walker Evans, the magazine work, Gasoline, Jeff Hall, Picture of Women, and Photography and Cinema, Art and Photography. He has also written for a number of magazines, which I'm sure you're very familiar with: Frieze, Photo Works, Aperture, Source, Art Review, the Oxford Art Journal, the Philosophy of Photography, and Tate magazine, among others. He's spoken at a number of...
I was asked to put some thoughts together around the relation between photography and art. So that's what I've done. Now, I think I should say first of all that festivals of photography really only exist because of the crazy enthusiasms and extraordinary hard work of those who organize them. If you put a festival on, the odds are always stacked against you. It's always an uphill struggle. And all those who attempt to organize a festival are to be congratulated, thanked, and indeed cherished. I've been involved in a number of festivals over the years, and I'm always struck by the kind of grassroots level of enthusiasm without which these things